Imagine being like the ultimate moral compass for an entire nation. Millions of people look at your face on a movie screen and they just see perfect justice, perfect reason, and this unshakable integrity.
Right.
But then imagine walking off that movie set, going home, taking off that mask, and being completely incapable of telling your own children that you love them.
It is, it's just a staggering psychological divide. And honestly, that is the focal point of our deep dive today.
Yeah, it's a heavy one.
It really is. We are exploring the life and the legacy of Henry Fonda, a legendary American actor whose career spanned 5 decades across stage and screen.
A total icon.
Exactly. But our mission today is to look at the man behind the myth. We're going to examine how this painfully shy boy from Nebraska transformed into a global Hollywood superstar, a decorated military veteran, and simultaneously a deeply flawed patriarch.
Right.
Because his real life was marked by tragedies and emotional voids that were just as dramatic as any of his 106 films.
So as you listen today, I want you to really put yourself in his shoes. Think about what it actually takes to portray total, unwavering moral clarity for the world, while grappling with an absolute inability to connect with the people closest to you.
It's quite the paradox.
It is. How does a person even begin to build that kind of wall? Was he just born a blank slate? Or did something happen to fracture him early on?
Well, the foundation of that wall was built very early, back in Nebraska, where he was born in 1905.
Okay.
He was raised in a really tight-knit family that practiced Christian Science. And to understand his psychology, you kind of have to understand what that environment practically entailed.
Because it's not just a casual Sunday church thing, right?
No, not at all. Christian Scientists rely heavily on faith for healing, notably avoiding doctors and medical interventions. So it creates this highly supportive, deeply rigid, and emotionally contained environment.
No.
Yeah, there is a strong emphasis on maintaining a very specific internal discipline. And even though Fonda himself later drifted away from the church, he became an agnostic later in life, that early environment of suppressing outward vulnerability, that was his baseline.
So you have a kid growing up in a world where you are taught to kind of bottle up the physical and emotional vulnerabilities. What was his actual personality like? I mean, was he a confident kid?
Oh, the absolute extreme opposite. He was bashful to the point of actual physical pain.
Oh, man.
He was incredibly shy. He completely avoided girls outside of his own sisters, and he constantly just tried to shrink into the background. But then by his senior year of high school, his genetics kind of betrayed him.
What happened?
He suddenly shot up to over 6 feet tall.
Oh, that is a nightmare for an introvert.
Right.
You desperately want to be invisible, but you literally tower over everyone in the exact room you're trying to hide in. You just can't hide.
You really can't.
But I know there's a specific defining historical moment that hits him right around this time, and it's not just about adolescent awkwardness.
Yeah, 1919, the Omaha race riot.
Right.
When Henry Fonda was 14 years old, he and his father were in a nearby building, and they witnessed the brutal lynching of a young black man named Will Brown.
God.
This wasn't an abstract concept he read about in a newspaper. He watched a mob commit murder with his own 2 eyes.
The way he recalled it in a BBC interview, I think it was decades later in 1975, is just absolutely haunting.
It really is.
He said, and I'm quoting here, "It was the most horrendous sight I'd ever seen. My hands were wet. There were tears in my eyes. All I could think of was that young black man dangling at the end of a rope."
That horrific trauma, it permanently altered his internal wiring. It instilled this acute, lifelong awareness of prejudice and a really visceral rage against injustice.
Because he saw the absolute worst of humanity up close.
Exactly. And when you look at the characters he would later play, these men who stand alone against angry mobs or corrupt systems, you can trace a direct psychological line back to that 14-year-old boy staring out a window.
He was powerless, though.
He was completely powerless to stop the mob in Omaha, but he basically spent the rest of his life embodying the fight against that exact kind of mob on film.
But wait, how does a kid who is traumatized, toweringly awkward, and painfully shy even end up voluntarily walking onto a stage? That seems like the absolute last place an introvert would want to be.
It's super counterintuitive, but it began almost by accident. When he was 20, a friend of his mother's basically pushed him to try out for a juvenile part at the local Omaha Community Playhouse.
Okay.
And in a wild twist of Hollywood fate, that family friend was Dodie Brando.
Wait, Brando?
Yes. Marlon Brando's mother.
That is incredible. The mother of the next generation's greatest actor practically forces the previous generation's greatest actor onto the stage.
It's crazy.
Does he instantly fall in love with the spotlight?
Not at all. Honestly, initially he was terribly embarrassed by his acting. He felt incredibly exposed up there.
That makes sense.
He was actually much more comfortable backstage, building the sets, painting, doing carpentry. But then he was cast in the lead role of a play called Merton of the Movies.
Okay.
And that was the exact moment the psychological shift really occurred.
How so? Like, what changes for him?
Well, he realized that acting wasn't about showing himself to the world. It was about deflecting attention entirely.
Oh, I see.
When he was on stage speaking lines from a script, nobody was looking at awkward, tongue-tied Henry Fonda. They were looking at the character. The script gave him a voice when he didn't have one of his own.
It's like an emotional exoskeleton.
Yes.
He didn't have the internal emotional bones to just stand up and interact as himself, so he had to step into this pre-constructed, scripted mechanical suit just to be able to walk into a room and be perceived safely.
That is the perfect way to describe it. And once he discovered that exoskeleton, he realized he just couldn't live without it. So he quit his regular job, and in 1928, he headed east to officially seek his fortune as an actor.
I have to imagine that transition wasn't smooth.
Mm-hmm.
Moving from Nebraska to the East Coast in the late 1920s, right as the economy is about to absolutely collapse.
Oh, it was a brutal crucible. He started by working in summer stock in Massachusetts.
Summer stock is tough.
It is. It's essentially this grueling theatrical training ground where acting companies put on a rapid rotation of plays in rural areas during the summer months. It's exhausting work.
Right.
And from there, he heads to New York City right into the teeth of the Great Depression. He and his peers were quite literally starving. There were days they couldn't even scrounge together enough pennies for the subway.
That level of poverty really strips you down to your core. Who is he surviving this phase with?
So during this period, he meets and briefly marries the actress Margaret Sullivan. The marriage was highly volatile and very short-lived. I mean, they were divorced by 1933. But his fortunes and his personal life shifted dramatically when he crossed paths with another struggling young actor he had briefly met back in Massachusetts, James Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart.
The one and only.
They get connected by a mutual friend, Joshua Logan, and Jimmy and Hank decide to become roommates in New York to pool their money and survive the Depression. But wait, aren't Jimmy Stewart and Henry Fonda notoriously polar opposites later in life?
Night and day. Politically speaking, Fonda was a staunch liberal Democrat, and Stewart was a very conservative Republican.
Right.
And to be clear, for everyone listening, we are simply reporting the factual nature of their differing beliefs here, not endorsing either political stance. But those ideological differences were so intense that they actually got into a physical fistfight over politics early in their friendship.
Wait, how do you survive a literal brawl with your roommate and then stay best friends for the rest of your life?
Extreme compartmentalization.
The exoskeleton again.
Exactly. Following the fight, they made a strict, unbreakable pact to never, ever discuss politics again. They just walled off that entire section of their identities from each other.
Which is such a massive foreshadowing of his ability to just build emotional walls whenever things get uncomfortable.
Definitely.
But professionally, when does the starving artist phase finally end for him?
1935. He gets cast as the leading man in the Hollywood screen adaptation of Wife. The farmer takes a wife, a role he had actually previously perfected on Broadway.
Okay, so a big break.
Huge. The financial whiplash was staggering. He went from debating whether he could afford a subway token to making $3,000 a week.
$3,000 a week in the 30s.
Yeah. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $70,000 a week today.
That is insane.
He is suddenly dining with Carole Lombard. He basically becomes an overnight movie star.
And he just rattles off these massive foundational hits right after that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Jezebel with Bette Davis in 1938. Jesse James and Young Mr. Lincoln in 1939. And then we get to 1940. The Grapes of Wrath, directed by John Ford.
An absolute classic.
Fonda plays Tom Joad, the ultimate, desperately poor, Dust Bowl hero fighting for survival. Here's my question, though. How does a guy who is suddenly making a fortune, living the Hollywood high life, so convincingly channel the soul of a starving migrant worker? Is that just pure acting technique?
It goes deeper than technique, really. It points back to that profound empathy rooted in his past.
Right.
When he played Tom Joad, he wasn't just pretending to be poor. He was pulling from the emotional memory of powerlessness. He remembered the injustice of the Omaha lynching. He remembered the gnawing hunger of his early days in New York.
He had actually lived the desperation.
Exactly. He channeled the righteous anger of the dispossessed because he had felt it and witnessed it firsthand. The performance was a masterpiece and earned him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor.
So he hits the absolute pinnacle. He has the money, the fame, the critical acclaim, the Oscar nomination, and then right at the peak, he just walks away.
Because the world shifted. World War II breaks out. In 1942, Fonda enlists in the United States Navy.
Just leaves it all behind.
Yeah, and his reasoning for giving up his Hollywood throne perfectly encapsulates his rigid internal code. He told the press, "I don't want to be in a fake war in a studio."
That quote cuts right through the entire Hollywood illusion.
It really does.
He didn't just want to play a hero. He felt a moral obligation to actually go be one.
And he did. He served 3 years. He started as a quartermaster on a destroyer and eventually became a lieutenant in air combat intelligence in the Central Pacific.
Wow.
He saw real war. He earned a Bronze Star and a Presidential Unit Citation.
I have to assume that when a decorated war hero who was previously an A-list movie star comes back to Hollywood, the studios are just throwing absolutely massive multi-year contracts at him to get him back on screen.
They certainly tried, but he rejected all the long-term studio contracts. Yeah, he wanted to return to his roots, to the stage. He went to Broadway and originated the title role of Lieutenant Douglas A. Roberts in the comedy play Mr. Roberts.
Oh, I know that one.
He won a Tony Award for it. And he was so dedicated to the authenticity of the character that he actually wore his own real-life Navy officer's cap during the performances.
Which sets up a massive legendary collision. Because a few years later, in 1955, they decide to make the film adaptation of Mr. Roberts.
Right.
And the studio hires John Ford to direct it. The same legendary director who guided Fonda to his Oscar nomination in The Grapes of Wrath. But I know this goes terribly wrong. What actually happens on that set?
It was a massive ideological clash over the soul of the character.
Okay.
Ford wanted to inject this broad slapstick comedy into the film adaptation. But Fonda had lived in the skin of Lieutenant Roberts on stage for years. He viewed the character with profound moral dignity.
Because he was a real veteran playing a veteran.
Exactly. To Fonda, Ford wasn't just making a script tweak to get some laughs. Ford was violating the ethical truth of the character.
And Fonda's internal code won't let him back down from an ethical breach.
Never. The argument over the tone escalated so intensely that John Ford literally punched Henry Fonda in the jaw.
A legendary director punching his A-list leading man in the face over character integrity.
Yes.
It takes incredible stubbornness to stand your ground there.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the sheer guts it takes to walk away from Hollywood for Broadway and then to get into a fistfight with John Ford. What does this tell us about Fonda's rigid internal code?
It tells us he was unyielding. After the physical altercation, he vowed he would never work with John Ford again, and he kept that vow.
Wow.
Yet, showcasing his complex ability to compartmentalize again, years later, Fonda voluntarily participated in a documentary honoring Ford's career. He could hold a bitter, unbreakable personal grudge while still objectively respecting the man's artistic genius.
That compartmentalization is fascinating. He knows exactly where his boundaries are professionally. But as we move into his later career, we see him start to take these wild, unexpected risks. And suddenly, some major insecurities start peeking through the armor.
We see that really clearly in 1957 with 12 Angry Men.
Oh, such a good movie.
It is an absolute cinematic masterpiece. Fonda not only starred as Juror 8, you know, the single holdout juror fighting against the prejudices of the room to save a young man's life, but he also co-produced the film.
Oh, I didn't know he produced it.
Yeah, and it was a massive undertaking. They shot it in just 17 days in one claustrophobic, sweltering room on a really tight budget.
And it wins him a BAFTA for Best Foreign Actor. It goes down in history. But taking on the role of producer really rattled him, didn't it?
It terrified him. Initially, the film performed poorly at the box office. The financial stress of that failure shook him to his core.
Because his security was threatened.
Exactly. He was so anxious about the financial loss that he vowed he would never produce a movie again. He was genuinely terrified that failing as a producer might derail his ability to get acting jobs. Underneath the confident leading man exterior, he harbored a deep anxiety about losing his livelihood.
Which makes his next major pivot even more shocking. If you're afraid of losing your audience, you usually play it safe. But in 1968, He takes a role in Sergio Leone's epic spaghetti western, Once Upon a Time in the West.
One of my favorites.
And he doesn't play the hero. He plays Frank, an utterly cold-blooded psychopathic villain, a man who guns down children on screen.
Which was huge. Fonda initially turned the role down. Leone had to fly all the way from Italy to the United States just to convince him to take the part.
That's dedication.
When Fonda finally relented, he showed up to the set with brown-colored contact lenses. He assumed that because he was playing an evil character, he needed to hide his heroic face and look dark and menacing.
Oh, but Leone refuses to let him wear them. This is the most brilliant directorial choice.
It really is.
Leone specifically wanted Fonda's innocent, piercing, famous blue eyes. It is like weaponizing a trusted brand logo. Imagine taking a wholesome, familiar, comforting label and slapping it onto a bottle of deadly poison just to shock the consumer.
It was a masterful subversion of audience expectations. When the camera pans around to reveal the ruthless killer's mace for the first time in that movie, the 1968 audience audibly gasped in the theaters.
I can imagine.
Because it was Henry Fonda, the ultimate American hero, staring back at them with dead, murderous eyes. It proved his staggering versatility. He spent the rest of the 60s and 70s working compulsively, playing everything from the President of the United States in the Cold War thriller Failsafe to roles in disaster movies like The Swarm.
He is perfectly in control of his craft.
Yeah.
He takes massive swings. He manipulates the audience's emotions flawlessly. But we really have to circle back to the central contradiction we established at the very beginning of this deep dive.
The private void.
Right. Because while he was navigating all these complex characters flawlessly on a soundstage, he was completely incapable of navigating the emotional landscape of his own home.
The contrast between his public empathy and his private emotional starvation is stark. Fonda was married 5 times.
5 times.
Yeah. His second marriage was to Frances Ford Seymour, a wealthy widow. They had 2 children together, Jane and Peter Fonda, who grew up to become acting legends in their own right. But the marriage behind closed doors was profoundly unhappy for him.
In August 1949, he asks Frances for a divorce so that he can marry his 21-year-old mistress. Frances, who had already been battling severe emotional and mental health issues, is just devastated.
Right.
She checks into a psychiatric sanitarium for treatment, and then a few months later, in April 1950, she tragically commits suicide there.
It is a heavy, devastating reality. She left 6 suicide notes for various people in her life, but pointedly, she left no final message for her husband.
That says so much.
Fonda's reaction to this tragedy was to immediately wall off his emotions. He quickly arranged a private funeral and refused to discuss it. The psychological toll this emotional suppression took on his family was immense.
It must have been unbearable for the kids.
It was. Dr. Margaret Gibson, the psychiatrist who had been treating Frances at the sanitarium, observed Fonda's demeanor and bluntly described him in her notes as a cold, self-absorbed person, a complete narcissist.
A complete narcissist.
No.
That is so jarring to hear about the man who played Tom Joad.
I know.
I mean, how do we reconcile the man who championed justice and empathy on screen with this reality? His third wife, Susan Blanchard, once described her role in their marriage as being like a geisha. She said she had to constantly manage his moods, tiptoe around him, and solve massive domestic problems that he absolutely refused to even acknowledge existed. How could someone so empathetic in his art be so terrifyingly blank in his real life?
He fiercely loathed displays of raw feeling in himself, and he hated it in others. Whenever he felt that his emotional wall was being breached by his wives or his children, he would lash out.
In what way?
Well, he had a furious, silent temper that genuinely terrified his family. His son, Peter Fonda, wrote in his autobiography that growing up, he was never actually sure how his father felt about him. The affection simply wasn't vocalized.
And he wouldn't even let them talk about his acting process either, right?
Not at all.
Because Jane Fonda was studying the method with Lee Strasberg in New York. And just to clarify for everyone, method acting is an intensive technique where an actor consciously draws on their own real, deeply personal emotional memories and traumas to bring a character to life.
Right, pulling from real pain.
Exactly. You have to open your own psychological wombs to do it. So Jane tries to talk to her dad about this technique.
And he completely shut her down. He essentially told her to shut up.
Wow.
He openly mocked method acting. He claimed he didn't know what his own acting method was. He wasn't conscious of how he did it. And he absolutely did not want to analyze it with her.
Because analyzing it would ruin the exoskeleton.
Exactly.
He spent his entire life building these massive walls specifically to avoid looking at his own real emotions. He relied entirely on the script. If he started picking apart the magic trick that kept him safe, the whole armor might fall apart.
Precisely. Stripped of a script, he was defensive, angry, and distant. But the story does not end there. There is a final act, a real-life catharsis for the Fonda family that, incredibly, happens exactly where you would expect it to.
On a movie screen.
Yes.
1981. On Golden Pond. This feels like the emotional climax of his entire life.
It really was. Jane Fonda actually bought the film rights to the play, specifically hoping her father would play the lead role. It was an olive branch.
Beautiful.
The film stars Fonda alongside Katharine Hepburn and Jane, and the storyline eerily mirrors the Fonda's real-life strained dynamic. Henry plays Norman Thayer, an emotionally brittle, aging, distant father who struggles to connect with his daughter.
It's astonishing. The only way this father and daughter could actually look each other in the eye and work through their decades of real-life trauma was by dressing up as other people and acting it out on a soundstage.
Jane later confirmed that making the film allowed them to resolve certain real-life issues that they could never speak about plainly in a living room. The film was a massive critical and commercial success.
It's a classic.
It earned 10 Academy Award nominations and brought Henry Fonda his very first and only competitive Best Actor Oscar.
And he was too ill with heart disease to attend the ceremony.
Yes. Jane accepted the Oscar on his behalf. She held up the statue and quipped to the audience that her dad, true to his understated nature, would probably just say, "Well, ain't I lucky?"
And Peter got his closure, too. Shortly before Henry died in 1982, Peter revealed that he finally, as a grown man, heard his father clearly say the words, "I love you, son."
It took a lifetime, but the wall finally came down.
Wow.
It really encapsulates the profound irony of his existence. Here was a man deeply scarred by the brutal injustice he witnessed as a child, which drove him to play characters of unparalleled integrity, warmth, and courage.
Right.
Yet the exact same trauma and shyness that made him seek the safety of the stage also forced him to build an impenetrable wall between himself and the people he loved most. He was a master communicator of the human condition, but for almost his entire life, he could only speak his truth when someone else handed him the script.
The emotional exoskeleton protected him from the world, but it also trapped him inside of it. It is a brilliant, tragic paradox.
It really is.
So I want to leave you with something to mull over today. The next time you watch a masterful, heart-wrenching performance on screen, ask yourself, is the actor finally tapping into who they really are? Or are they desperately escaping the person they can't bear to be? Think about that, and we'll see you next time as we take another deep dive into the stories you thought you knew.